One of our biggest concerns in 2020 is what we call fallow syndrome. Today during our Farm Basics time, we're going to talk about exactly what that is and how it can be prevented. If you go back to the August USDA crop report, they said that 19 million acres in the United States went unplanted. 19 million! So all those acres are at risk, plus a whole bunch more acres that got crop destroyed early in the season.
Well, you don't have to go very far to find acres where there's not a crop growing, and that's what we're talking about with this whole fallow syndrome. We're talking about fallow being, hey, there's no crop growing on this ground. Now a year later, we're trying to raise a crop in this ground, and there's a negative impact. When soil has living plants in it, that's a great thing because the soil is full of living things. There's all kinds of microbes in that soil that need a living host. And when you don't have that, when you go a fallow year, you're going to have issues next year because those microbial populations have gone down or gone away. Now we see this often in the West, where we see this chem-fallow rotation where farmers will say, well, I'm going to take a year off, I'm going to try to replenish the soil with moisture, and then the next year I'll have 2 years of moisture to go on. That's a great thought, but are you really going to trap all that moisture when you let ground go fallow on purpose? And then what are the other downsides? So this year in 2019, we saw so many farms that just couldn't get planted because they were too wet. We're going to talk about that today.
Okay, so here's what fallow syndrome actually is. When you plant corn in the spring following a fallow year, what we commonly see is that corn turns purple early in the season. The reason why is many of the Mycorrhizae fungi die the year before because there's no host crop. Mycorrhizae fungi, their purpose in the soil is they will help bring nutrients that aren't normally available to the plant. They'll help convert those nutrients into a form the plant can use and actually bring them to and in the plant.
Well, you think about these tiny little fungi, they're way smaller than even the root hairs on our crops. So they can get into those tiny little crevices out there, or through enzyme or chemical activity that they're going to have around them, they can make some nutrients that are tied up break free so they can bring them into the plant.
Now you might say, well, why do these fungi do this great thing for the plant? What do they get? Well, what they get from the plant is sugars. And when we think about plants, we often think about, oh, those roots are there to bring in water and nutrients. That's great. But those roots are also there to kick out organic acids, to make nutrients more available, and to provide sugars for some of these beneficial microbes that are in the soil.
And we just named one of the many species that are out in the soil that require a living host. And in exchange, they're doing some work to help that plant as well.
So very commonly what we see, if there's been a fallow year and nothing is grown on that ground, the following year when corn is planted, we will commonly see 30 to 50 bushel yield losses. We don't want that to happen to any farmer out there. So the solution is raise a cover crop this year, or raise some crop that will support many of these microbes that are beneficial to the next crop. Most commonly, we're going to think about a lot of the grass species, whether that's rye or oats or wheat, but there are a lot of different crops that could help those beneficial fungi and bacteria that are in the soil. We would just say, though, don't just plant radishes, for example. Radishes don't support mycorrhizae fungi. If you're going to use a cover crop, use a blend. That's your best bet for getting the most beneficial organisms ready to go for your next crop.
As Brian mentioned, there are at least 19 million acres in the United States alone this year that are going to have to deal with this issue. Now, many of those acres did get a cover crop on them, but some did not. So you'll notice some farmers around the country putting a cover crop in the fall or in the early spring, making some adjustments to their cropping plan to try to offset what's going to happen with fallow syndrome.
Okay, last thing that I would say is, if, let's say, you know of a farmer, or you are a farmer who had this happen and you didn't get a cover crop, or you decide not to put a cover crop out there at all, and all you do is have that ground black, absolutely don't plant corn the next year. You have to plant soybeans or some other crop, or you're going to suffer this 30 to 50 bushel yield loss, which usually happens.
Well, fallow syndrome is a scary thing, but so is controlling our weed of the week. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed later in the show.